friends. Welcome to the Mobile Monger Podcast, where we go behind the scenes in the cheese world to chat with the people making, selling, or distributing your favorite specialty food products. I'm your host, Janae Muha, certified cheese professional, longtime cheesemonger, and producer advocate. Of all of the careers in cheese, an affineur is not one you come across often. They stay hidden in humidity and temperature-controlled closed quarters, doing the repetitious work of preparing cheese for the perfect moment that it can be shipped or eaten. When Josh Windsor started posting his musings on Instagram at the beginning of the pandemic, it felt like getting an inside look into a secret world. We're taking it out of the caves and into your ears with this conversation with Josh, and we chat about what his job entails as an affineur at Murray's Cheese Caves, and the true dedication he had getting himself into cheese in the first place.
So my name is Josh Windsor. I am the Caves manager at Murray's Cheese, so I'm affineur by trade. I'm actually fairly new to the cheese industry. I've only been doing this a little under 6 years, and Murray's has been my only home in the cheese industry. So prior to working in cheese, I was a systems integrator. So I had designed security systems like card access, video surveillance, that kind of thing, and made them integrate with other systems in buildings. I did that for almost 20 years, and it wasn't work that I actually enjoyed doing. I stayed in the industry just because I really liked the people I worked with, but not the work itself. And so I often tell people that I sublimated that, not loving my job, by a ritual that I implemented called beer and cheese Sundays. So every Sunday I would pair beers and cheese. I was living in the Northwest at the time, so beer was abundant, cheese was abundant. And often I would bring, go to microbreweries, fill a growler, bring it to the cheese counter. Di Laurenti and Pike Place Market was my go-to counter of choice, and just start asking questions about what would pair well with it, or what's new in the case, or what have I never tried before. Once I started developing relationships with the mongers there, and I did that pretty much every Sunday for almost 18 years, and developed a deep passion for cheese through that. And really, Rachel Lucas was a monger there, and she was, just really opened my eyes to kind of the world of cheese, and the stories behind the cheese, and ways to think about pairing and serving cheese. And then I started buying books on cheese, and so it always was something that I was developing a deeper interest in. And then about 5.5 years ago, I moved back to New York City and had an opportunity to leave that industry. And so I got a chance to ask myself the question, what are things that I love and how can I do those for a living? And cheese was at the top of that list. And I had really no idea outside of mongering or making cheese, what a career in cheese would look like. I figured I probably wasn't going to be a cheesemaker in New York City. And I didn't know if I had it in me to do retail again at that stage of my life. But I was willing to, if it was a start. So I just started looking around, good food jobs boards, anywhere where I could find information about it. And I came across 2 internships in the city. One was for Crown Finish Caves as an affineur, and one was for Murray's Cheese as an affineur. And Murray's Cheese was the only one that called me back of the 2. I applied for both, and my hope was, because they were both part-time, was that I could get them both and do them at the same time. I'm so glad that didn't happen, because I probably would have killed myself. I had no idea how much physical labor affinage was going into it. So I started as a Caves intern, learning on the job from the team here at Murray's, what affinage is, how you go about it. And then it just circumstances happened to be that the Caves assistant left 2 weeks before my internship was up, and they offered me the job at the end of the internship. So I was able to continue on in affinage from that, and just kind of work my way up through various positions within the Cave since then.
Awesome. Let's talk about affinage. What does your daily task list, I guess, look like in the Caves?
Yeah, so affinage is a very repetitious job. So we have 4 caves. each dedicated to a different style of affinage. And each cave has maybe 3 to 6 different cheeses in it that we work on. And depending on the size of the cheese and the style of the cheese, it kind of determines how long the cheese needs to stay in the caves in order to age, and then the various tasks that are performed on it. So, smaller format, softer cheeses have a shorter period of time in the cave. We eat those cheeses much younger, and then bigger format, firmer cheeses, heavier cheeses are in for a much longer period of time. And so usually a lot of the work is determined by, what's the best way to put this? The repetition is much faster and close together for smaller cheeses and longer and more drawn apart. So each cheese has its own rhythm and its own cycle that kind of fit together in this like elaborate interconnection Venn diagram of what the work is. So like a Monday is typically a day where we ash our Loire Valley cheeses. So we have 3 goat cheeses that we bring in from the Loire Valley in the classic shapes, Valençay, Saint Mar, and Seltzer. Those we ash in a vegetable ash solution. So we use a wet ash on them. Those all get put onto stainless steel carts. We put those in our drying room, and then we dry them out over the course of a week through a staged drying. So every Monday has that ashing step. And then that particular cheese then gets flipped daily on its first week, and then flipped every other day on its second week in the blooming cave, and then gets wrapped. So that has a very regular schedule for me.
And those come in super fresh and young and really no rind or anything on them. Like, how do those come into the caves?
So those come in cryovac, so they're sealed in a vacuum seal bag on that. So those come by boat. Otherwise, people would be spending an arm and a leg to get that cheese, which is not great. We do try to keep our costs down as much as possible. So they come by boat, and so typically, I don't know so the route of European cheeses coming to Americas is circuitous. There's a lot of touch points where cheeses get consolidated into containers, and then negotiations and going across seas, and then coming through borders and going through all the various customs, and then bonding warehouses and all of that. And then they come to us. That whole process from make to finish is about 40 days. So once they seal them and we have them here at our shop, they're 40 days. Usually those cheeses would be ashed in a day or two after being salted and rested. The sealing them in a vacuum bag halts that aging quite a bit, but not completely. So they are aging a little by the time they get to us. And actually, we found that if they age longer in the bag, they bloom a little better. In our case, there's a little bit of yeast development that happens on that. And yeast is a deacidifier, and it really helps kickstart the whole aging process on a lot of cheeses for that. So very roundabout way. They look and feel like they're 3 days old, but technically they're about 45 days old.
Cool. Thank you for that information, because I knew it took a long time for them to come over, but like, I don't know how that works out when you're, so continue on. Mondays, you're ashing those delightful cheeses, and
then the rest of the week, it kind of piecemeals together based upon the rhythms of the cheese. Because a lot of cheeses, like particularly cheeses that you're washing or tending to a very fast growing rind, you're more actively involved in them when they're first in the caves, and then it kind of tapers off over time. So like wash rind cheeses, which are cheeses that get washed in a brine solution of some sort, usually get washed, depending on the size of them, every other day or every 3 days when they first come into the caves, and then maybe twice a week, and then maybe once a week. And so if you have several batches of those, you're kind of, the youngest ones are getting washed a lot, the other ones are getting washed less and less. So that kind of piecemeals together. And then the older cheeses, then you kind of layer that work in on top of it. So today was a Friday. Fridays are the days of everything that I didn't get to the rest of the week, as opposed to things that are like on a more rigid schedule, which this week happened to be most of our Alpine style cheeses. So our big, large format cheeses. So today I had a little bit of washing in our wash cave for a couple hours, to some small format wash rinds, and then really tended to Tarentaise, which is a cheese from Springwood Farm that we age. Annalise, which is a cheese unique to us, but made by Walter Ross out of Zuckerschweiz, Switzerland. And there's another cheese that I've already forgotten at this point.
It happens. Well, I was going to ask, like, how many cheeses do you usually have in rotation in the caves at any given point?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different kind of categories that we think of in our caves. So we have what are called our cage age reserves, and these are cheeses that where they're an existing cheese out in the market that we're changing in some way when they come into their caves. Either they're a cheese that just being in our environment changes the profile in some way, either aroma or texture, or they're cheeses where we're actually doing an entirely different affinage regime on them. So cheeses in that, I mentioned Tarentaise. Tarentaise is an homage to the Beaufort Abondance, large format mountain cheeses of the Jura region, but it's made in Vermont. We bring that in at usually between 4 and 6 months old. So kind of like if we were a Comté, often or about that same age, and then age it out to, typically we try to get it to about 11 or 12 months when we release it on that. So that would be a cave age reserve. And those are always the cheeses in those categories are always in production. So we always have them available unless there's like some crazy run on a cheese, and it takes a while to age out another batch. And then the Greensward, which is our wash rind cheese that we do, that is actually Harbison from Jasper Hill. So it starts out as a bloomy rind cheese, but we treat it as a wash rind cheese. So we wash it in a salted brine cider solution. And so like make it really bacony and meaty as opposed to sprucey and berry, which is like the classic Harbison profile. So all of those are cheeses that are in regular production. Right now, I think there was a couple that kind of disappeared during the pandemic, but I think we're at about 16 of those cave age reserve. And then we have our cave age originals, which are cheeses that we've actually developed the recipe for here amongst our affinage team. So Peter Jenkalunas and Krista Jacobson and I have like worked to develop those. And those are things like Stocking Hall, which is our cloth bound cheddar, 80-10-10, which is a mixed milk washed rind kind of Taleggio format cheese, and our newest one is buttermilk Basque. So all three of those are made for us by Old Chatham in upstate New York. But we either like with Stocking Hall, we developed that recipe up at the Cornell Dairy Lab, Stocking Hall, where it gets its name, and then worked with the head cheesemaker at Old Chatham to train them on the make, and then slowly, transitioned it into their facility. And then the other two we actually developed at Old Chatham. So we would just go up on Saturdays when they weren't making other cheese and figure out the recipe, and then work with them on getting that into production. And so we have the three of those right now. So we have the 16 cave aged reserves, we have the 3 cave age originals, and then we have our limited edition cheeses, and we do about 12 of those a year. And these are where we just think as far outside the box as we can usually, or something that's only seasonal that we can only get for a short period of time. And so those can be across the board on it right now. So the next one we're releasing is a 100% small format sheep milk tome that is completely coated multiple times in a olive oil infused with Szechuan peppercorn, and then develops a natural rind. So things that are outside of traditional trajectories for cheeses often fall in that category. We do a DO Manchego that we actually age in Long Island City for a year that around the holidays. That's in our limited edition series. So those kinds of things.
Sweet. And you mentioned 2 other people on the affinage team. Is there just 3 of you that really work in the caves, or do you have more people that come in and put their hands on some cheese?
Yeah, there's one other person who puts their hands on the cheese. So Louis Laguerre handles. He's our caves assistant. So he predominantly works on the cheddars. Handles all of our wrapping. So every single small format cheese is hand wrapped by Louis Laguerre,
Fun.
which is still astounding to me. That is just one person all week, just hand wrapping every single cheese and labeling it. But yeah, so PJ is the director of affinage, and our department also shares responsibilities as the QA department for all of Murray's. So Krista is the QA manager and then does some affinage as well. She used to be the games manager before me. So we have three people who are like, really know a lot, dedicated to affinage. Lewis is learning the ropes on the natural cave right now.
And so all of these cheeses are basically sold just within the Murray shop in New York, or do these make their way? I mean, also you guys do mail order and whatnot, so like e-commerce. So you can, like, where do you get these cheeses basically?
Yeah, so we have our retail, so that's New York City. So we have a flagship store in the West Village. We have a store in Grand Central, in the arcade there, and then we have a restaurant and retail space in Long Island City as well, called Cheese Bar. So that's where you can walk up and get all of those cheeses. E-commerce, yeah. So we serve the U.S. We can ship cheeses around. Those are all available through our website, through e-commerce. And then Murray's Cheese is a subsidiary of Kroger. So there, we work and develop a lot of the cheese kiosks around the country at Kroger stores and Kroger affiliated stores, the Kroger family of stores, so Ralph's and QFC and Mariano's and Harris Teeter's and all of those. Many of them have Murray's. And so some cheeses that we're able to scale up have started to show up there. So this last year, we started working on getting Stocking Hall, our cloth bound cheddar, available in those as well. For that, there was a brief time where Greensward was available nationally, and that turned out to be far more production than we can actually handle in the caves.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of production, because I mean the Kroger Murray's kiosks there's a lot of them now.
I have no idea how many there are.
I was just talking at ACS to someone about it, and I thought that there was only like 300 or 400, and they said I feel like it was closer to like almost up to 1,000 or something around that.
Yeah, it's
where
in
it's
that.
been.
Yeah,
that's a lot of production for any cheese.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I mean, just to kind of give a comparison, we're aging in Queens, in New York City, so space is a premium. Our caves are about the size of my apartment in Brooklyn, maybe a little bit bigger. It's not a ton of space, so we maximize it as best we can.
And still make sure that everything has the appropriate amount of air. And there's a lot to think about in that realm of small space and how to use it appropriately, but still give the cheese what it needs.
Exactly. Yeah. Airflow is big in aging cheese.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned it, but this little collaboration between Murray's and Jasper Hill, Greensward, just won third place at the American Cheese Society judging and competition, best in show. So I just wanted to talk to you about like kind of how you feel about something that you've put your hands on so much is now like considered one of the top tier cheeses in the United States. Like, what does that feel like for you?
It's great. I mean, it's always great to win awards. And then when you don't win any, you're like, awards mean nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah, one of the things I find really fascinating about awards in general is they're really awarded to a specific cheese, right? The cheese that's sitting in front of those judges on that particular day. And we're really small production. So when it came time, we don't like age specific cheeses for the awards. We just pull from, whatever we were aging at the time. So when it came time to a week before we needed to ship cheese out, we went to the caves and we're like, oh, we have 2 batches of Greensward that are 2 weeks apart, and it's has a shelf life of about 6 to 7 weeks. Which one do we think is going to be ready at the time of it? And then we debate with how quickly we think the cheese is breaking down and going to be at that perfect gooiness on a specific day and time, and we fingers crossed that we got it right. And then we look at an entire batch of cheese that we've already wrapped. So we have it's semi-translucent paper, so we have a rough idea of what it looks like underneath, and then assemble the 8 or 10 cheeses that are required for submission on it. So it's always just a shot in the dark, and then remembering what that batch tasted like based upon your notes when you find out everyone. So one of the questions I get asked a lot is from mongers is how much does the cheese we're selling now differ from the one that won? And I'm like, I don't have that memory at all. I'm like, I'm just pretty close. I mean, my goal is that it always tastes the same, but consistent. There's always variability on it. But yeah, so I mean, it's the thing that's great about the awards is more just a coming together, like often I like just seeing the list and being reminded of a cheese that I haven't tried in a long time, and seeing it getting recognized, or creameries that have popped up that I had no idea existed, and just putting things on my radar that maybe I hadn't been considering before is probably the biggest thing for me. I mean, before I got into the cheese world, when Culture magazine used to publish the ACS awards, that was like, as a cheese nerd, that was like a big moment, because it was just like, this world of cheese, early on in the internet, most cheesemakers weren't even on it. And so it was really the only time I got to even hear about a lot of these cheeses and what was being done. And that, I think that's the big value in it.
Yeah, without the Festival of Cheese at conference, we're not able to taste the exact batches when it happens anymore. But I also really love the idea of you just being like, I don't know, just send that, and that's just going to be what it is. I prefer that, because if you are being consistent as a cheesemaker and affineur, then like your stuff is great all the time. So let's reward that. I think that is a beautiful thing in and of itself. So
yeah. And and then you just catch, and when you do it that way, it's like it's on a specific day. And for younger cheeses or like smaller format cheeses, it just could be the luck of the draw on that day. If it had been 5 days earlier, it would be an entirely different set of cheeses.
Well, and it's, as much as we try to take the subjectivity out of judging, obviously personal preferences are always going to play a part in judging. There's no way around it. So, something that like one judge might love, another judge might not particularly love. So it's all just kind of like up in the air anyway. So it's nice to reward people for all of the hard work. And that's why I'm really excited to be a part of JNC. But I also understand that there's like, it's not the end all be all, but it is very exciting when you win an award.
Yeah. Yeah. It's great. It's fun to wear the medals around for a night.
Hear the clink.
Yeah.
So over the pandemic, you kind of showed up a lot on the old Instagram, and that's how I started interacting with your content. And you post beautiful pictures from the cave, but you also delve into philosophy and art references in your Instagram feed, and you're able to really blend the art and science in words on Instagram. And like, how does that transfer when you're in the caves actually doing your daily tasks? Like,
yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know if I thought about that. So I think one of the things about affinage, particularly affinage during the pandemic, so I should first state, during the pandemic, I actually stepped away from the caves for a period of time to oversee the pandemic response for Mary's Cheese. So that Instagram account I started that Instagram account just because I realized I was not spending as much time with cheese in my daily job as I wanted to. And it was just a way to kind of connect myself to the work that I was going back to and now back to at the time. So it was always kind of, to be a place about random musings about cheese, and just like, a reminder to myself about what it was that I loved about cheese and why I wanted to stay in it um, for the long term and go back specifically to affinage. But a lot of affinage work is done as solitary work. One, there's just not a ton of affineurs, and usually a cheesemaker will only have one. Even if they have a full-time affineur, it is one full-time affineur. There's not a lot of affinage teams in the U.S. I used to think there were lots of affinage teams in France, and then I started learning there's not even a lot of affinage teams elsewhere. It is very, very, very tiny world of people dedicated to affinage. From that, but it's solitary work and it's repetitious work. You have to, and you there's a level of consciousness that you have to have in order to do the work. Like, you have to be aware of the cheese that you're working on. You're constantly assessing it. It's very hands-on. It's very tactile, and you're making decisions on that. That being said, you're also usually in a semi-dark environment where it's, relatively cool, high humidity. Usually, like for me, we have a forced water system that sprays white noise mist throughout the entire time you're in there. There's the hum of the fans. It is very conducive to daydreaming, and so I think a lot of what you see, like those connections of things, are just kind of where my mind wanders as I'm working. Thinking about cheese and other books that I was reading on the subway ride in, and how those things all kind of piece together. Just it's a little stream of consciousness, I guess, in that way.
I mean, that I think that's great. I just that question kind of came to me because I pull tarot cards every morning just to kind of, have a thought about the day. And there's one card in particular, and I can't remember the exact number of it, but it's one of the pentacles. And the whole point is that it's about finding joy in the ordinary work and in the ordinary day-to-day tasks that you do. And like, that's how you grow and learn. And, so I'm always trying to be like, what am I doing every day? Like, sitting and editing photos is not like the most fun thing, but how can I find joy in that, to hopefully get better and also to not hate my life every day.
Yeah, it's interesting, and for me, having that contrast of the pandemic work, which was like very desk oriented, or like training oriented, as opposed to affinage, which is like really physical. Like a lot of the things that I write about is kind of the science behind affinage, but that's not 100% necessary in order to do the job. Like, a lot of the times you can learn it as a craft and through like mimicking other people and learning that way. More as like a trade, I would say. And I just found that I really enjoyed the physical labor. Like, I had to be moving and to really keep my mind active. That like not being physically active also kept me from being mentally active in a way that surprised me. I wasn't aware of that about myself until I stepped away from it, which makes me rethink the first part of my life. But but and that's also a personal thing. We have as I said, I started as a caves intern, and we run an internship. It's been on hiatus. We're actually going to be, I think, posting like mid-August, so that we're going to bring it back for a 2.5-month run, see how it goes, and figure it out in this new world, and then hopefully bring it back every quarter moving forward on it. But prior to the pandemic, we had 1 or 2 interns in the caves all the time. So I was constantly every 3 months training new people on this. And, like most people who started were like me. They were like, cheese, caves, I'm in. And they show up and they're like, what is this work? It's like I'm sanitizing things constantly. And there's like, I'm dipping my hands in water in the cold constantly. And, some people like fall in love with it like I did. A lot of people are like, this is not for me. I cannot do this, and like are gone within 3 weeks. You learn a lot about yourself doing cave work.
Well, and I would have to imagine too that if you went into the pandemic response team from the caves, that's also I would say everywhere, but especially New York had such a traumatic introduction, I guess, to the pandemic. Like, I feel like in Seattle, it kind of like started and we are like, oh, okay, we're the first ones. Wow, this is really scary. But I feel like New York definitely had a more traumatic version of it. So I think that probably I'm gonna postulate here that you were probably trying to connect to something that felt normal to you in a time that was very much not normal. But
Yeah.
if you have any thoughts on that, of like it being a really traumatic time and you not being in the caves.
Yeah, it was a very ambiguous time. I think just just the danger of it, but then also the regulatory aspects, particularly at New York State. I mean, played out on the national. We had a mayor and a governor who were constantly at odds over public health, very vocally at it and issuing different sets of criteria we were supposed to be operating under. And eventually, at one point, we had our company was had 7 different sets of uh, regulatory documents that we had to operate because they did it by industry sector, and we do a lot of different things. We have restaurants and retail and warehousing and transportation, and each one was written by a different committee and an entirely different set of criteria. So managing that, and then that would change every 3 weeks. And yeah, it was there was just a lot of that kind of fluctuation. So I think also the assurance of repetition in Avinash was definitely a part of that as well, and a joy to be back to.
Right. Well, what are you looking forward to? You've been doing this for a while now. Do you want to hang out in the caves for longer and just be a cave Josh, or are you looking for something new, or what are you thinking?
I just got back into the caves this year, so it's hard for me to think past that too much. I like working with cheese. I like having my hands on the cheese. I'm excited about just where this particular program goes. It's been the caves at Murray's have had a pretty long history now. I think 2004 was when it first started, and it was underneath the store at Bleecker. And it was really more, my new French term. I just learned this week. It was more focused on revivage, kind of the post affinage treatment on the rind that happens after affineur releases it. So the things that mongers would be doing to keep cheeses intact, particularly since we're importing so many European cheeses, it was an opportunity to kind of bring those to a better state for sale on that. And then through a lot of different people over the years, just thinking creatively about what that could be and become. And then the caves moving here to Long Island City and getting a little larger. And I think in the last couple of years we've really focused on being as original as we can in the caves, and pushing ourselves to think about what isn't on the market, or what aren't people doing, or where can we experiment in ways that other places can't, and just be a center for that kind of creativity. And so we have a lot of projects on the horizon that I'm just really excited about. So I don't want to leave until those are done. And then I just knowing myself, there are going to be other projects on the horizon. So it's going to be hard to tear away if I do. I mean, at some point, the physical labor is going to be difficult to do, and I will have to step away from it. Obviously, I love writing about cheese and talking about cheese, so that's probably some aspect of it. Hopefully, I'll have some time again. I used to teach a lot at the classrooms here at Murray's prior to the pandemic, and I haven't been able to do that in a long time. So I love getting out in the public and blowing people's minds about cheese.
Well, I wasn't really expecting you to come out with oh, I have a new job and I'm leaving very soon, especially considering that you said you were in a job that you hated for 20 years. So I feel like you do like your repetition and your security.
Exactly. Yeah, change is not my forte.
That's okay. That's okay. I have 3 final questions, the kind of speedish round. Are you ready?
Yes. I'll try to be brief, as you noticed. Brevity is not my strong point either.
It's whatever. I mean, nobody ever is. It's okay. What is your current cheese crush?
Oh, my current cheese crush. So I'm terrible at this question. So usually it's the last cheese that I just had. The last cheese that I just had, we got our hands on some green Monte Alva, and I was able to cure it in gochujang. So a spicy fermented chili pepper and age it out to about 7 months. I just tried it for the first time today, and it was far better than I expected it to be. No bitterness, which I was really shocked about. Not as spicy as I wanted it to be, but it was pretty good, satisfying. Current cheese crush beyond that. I have really actually. So I had two cheeses that I absolutely loved when we were at ACS. Bamboozle wash goat's milk, large format, kind of a style of cheese I don't get to see a lot of, but it reminded me a lot of like Caversham, which is Belgian wash rind cheese. I love that cheese. So Bamboozle really took my heart when I had tried that. And I tried Prairie Tome from Green Dirt, which is sheep's milk, natural rind cheese. Love me a natural rind, and that was fantastic. That was one that just stopped me in my tracks, where I was just like, picked it up, started walking, nibbled it, and I was like, oh, I should go back and talk about this cheese. So those are two cheeses that really caught my eye.
Perfect. Favorite cheese pairing?
It's good. I mean, I like a wash rind with beer. I grew up in a very German area, so that's like
Classic.
kind of the classic. One that I've been thinking about a lot that I haven't had in a while. So we do a cheese called Hudson Flower. It is a sheep's milk bloomy rind that we coat with hops and aromatic herbs on it, and that's a cheese that I don't typically enjoy by itself, but I love pairing it with things because the bitterness of the hops I think really pairs really well. And that cheese pairs great with a gin martini. Which also I don't find a lot of cheeses that pair with gin martinis really well. And it's 90 degrees here in New York, and it's Friday, so that was one that I was thinking about this morning.
You're like, I woke up thinking about that.
Yeah, exactly.
And then last one, a top food memory. Doesn't have to necessarily be like what you ate or whatever. It could just be a time that you spent eating with people or
Top food memory. So it's not going to be a specific one, but I'm not a terribly big breakfast person. I don't usually get up very early and get out the door before I can start thinking about food, and then I'm working, and then it's lunchtime. But on the weekends lately, my partner and I have been spending time doing the New Yorker crossword puzzle together, and just making a simple like rustic sourdough toast with a little bit of nut butter of some kind and a jam, and just like a different kind of combination every weekend. And I have been loving that. That has been like great food, great way to start a Sunday morning. So that's kind of been a top of mind as a food experience.
I think that that's absolutely perfect because that is comforting and it's like what you enjoy doing. So like having dinner every night with my husband is definitely something that I enjoy on a regular basis. So is there anything that we did not talk about that you would like to make sure gets mentioned?
No, eat more cheese. I just saw that the world dietary health recommendations are like 250 milligrams or 250 grams of dairy per day, which is less. The only thing it's less than is vegetables for that. But so the world diet should include more dairy. So eat more cheese. It's a good way of getting it.
Yeah, it's perfect food.
It is.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, and thanks for working so hard in those caves and cold and wet conditions.
It's a joy. I love it. Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. This was great. I haven't got to talk about Avinash in a little while, and it was also great meeting you at ACS.
It can be difficult to get across just how much work is involved in the making, aging, and selling of cheese. Even from the inside, these conversations with people at every level of the cheese sphere adds yet another layer. Thanks to Josh for sharing his role in the microcosm with us all. This podcast is recorded, produced, and edited by me, Janae Muha. Thank you to Ben Muha for allowing me to use your music. Follow along on my cheesy adventures at Instagram, Facebook, or directly on my website. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep spreading the word of good curd.